Hello everyone, my name is Alyssa and welcome to my channel. I am currently working on a series on the American Revolution and I found John Adams very interesting. I just decided to do a series on John Adams and this is its first episode. Let's get started. The Puritan migration to New England took place from 1620 to 1640. The Puritans, a devout group seeking religious freedom, not only fled political persecution, but also came to create a society that was, in their eyes, pure and faithful to their Christian ideals. In fact, the democracy they established was intertwined with religious power, which creates a unique form of governance where faith and politics were inseparable. A century after the Puritan exodus, Braintree, a small village without a downtown in Massachusetts, had become an old settlement by American standards. Life here was typical of any New England hamlet, where the Congregational Church was the center of the town spiritually and socially. The church's power stretched beyond devotionals into one's birth, marriage, death, and social and political awareness. The ordinary folks at this time not only revered the church's power, but also thought in terms of a highly stratified society. On the streets, when the elites walked by, commoners would step aside in deference. This reverence mirrored the respect given to the aristocracy in England, though here in New England we actually don't have those real aristocrats. But anyway, these American elites often advertised their status by purchasing church pews, and yes, don't forget about slaves. While the American colonies practiced democracy through town meetings where the adult white males gathered to discuss public affairs and elect leaders, they also had slavery. So this duality made their society seem somewhat Athenian, in a word, far from perfect. So let's talk more about town meetings. Town meetings, where adult white males, as we've mentioned before, participated in civic life, was practiced in both Plymouth and the Massachusetts Bay Colony, which were the very first colonies established by the Puritans. However, despite political participation being common, only the most distinguished men were, by convention, chosen to hold office. And women, on the other hand, were disenfranchised second class citizens, were not permitted to assert themselves in public, and they had little choice but to bear children and manage the home in their life. So, how did people make a living in the early 18th century America? Well, in small villages like Braintree, most residents were farmers, but some were part time farmers or did not farm at all. So, if you were not a farmer, you might be a professional, run a tavern, or for those without property, you became a craftsman. So, craftsman includes carpenters, blacksmiths, millers, tailors, and even gunsmiths. These were all in demand. So remember that American gunsmiths were a bit different from their British counterparts in that while the British mainly produced guns for military purposes, American gunsmiths crafted firearms for commoners, either for self protection or for hunting. So this set them apart from the European tradition of gun manufacturing, giving gunsmiths a unique place in American society. Now, let's return to our story. As we've mentioned, one could make a living by farming in America, and our main character in this episode, Deacon John Adams, was a part time farmer. Part time because when the growing season on his 15 acres of land came to an end in the fall and winter, he turned to making shoes. This made him a part time cordwainer, which was just a fancy word for shoemaker. And Deacon John Adams had never received formal education, but he was still well respected in the community. He had served as a tithing man, a tax collector, a militia officer. He was elected to the town's Board of Selectmen 9 times and had served 14 times as a deacon in his church. However, It's important to note that despite his influence, Deacon Adams was never fully accepted as a true elite. And then there is his dating life. It was just unusual for a man of his age to marry at 43, but Deacon John Adams did, marrying Susanna Boylston, a woman 20 years his junior. He tied the knot in 1734, and their first child was born a year later in the autumn of 1735. That baby would grow up to become one of the founding fathers of a new nation and eventually rise to become its second president.